Hi, I'm John Gatewood, founder and CEO of Gatewood Wealth Solutions, where we are on a mission to help individuals and families become and remain financially self-reliant. Welcome back to our weekly Market Insights broadcast. Every Wednesday, we cover the week's top news stories related to the market, economy, and your portfolios, so you can be better informed when making decisions about your money. Joining me remotely today is Aaron Tuttle, our Chief Investment Officer. In honor of today's inauguration of President Biden and Vice President Harris, I am sporting a red, white, and blue outfit. The great news is that we once again experienced a peaceful transition of power, and we all look forward to unifying our country and moving forward with policies to help our economy, especially those hardest hit by the pandemic. Aaron will talk about the proposed stimulus and the ability to make policy changes going forward and how we see these impacting the economy and the market. Thanks again. Aaron, give us your thoughts.
John, thanks. I wanted to let the viewers know that I am just south of Mobile, Alabama on an island called Dauphin Island, and it's beautiful here. It's off season. There really aren't that many people here. And the temperature is a little cold. The ocean is still beautiful. However, the internet connection is not great at all. So I don't want to do any video because I think that will really lag. And I promise our viewers are not missing out on the scenery for me because I'm actually broadcasting from the laundry room. That is the best place that I can get an internet connection. So let's just jump into it. We are not going to cover the coronavirus update. There really hasn't been much of a change since last week. And we wanted to have some time to really to discuss the stimulus bill as well as a possible tax and infrastructure policy coming out of the new administration. The plan includes a central promise by the Democrats, and that was to get those direct payments of $2,000 to most Americans. However, it is reduced by the $600 that Congress approved in December. President Biden, we can say that now, it's Wednesday, is pushing for $350 billion in funding assistance for state and local governments, plus $20 billion for public transit systems. Now, if those that are paying attention to the politics, this was a hang-up between the Republican-controlled Senate and the previous Congress, and now that the Democrats are at a 50-50 margin and they still have the House, the things that the Democrats wanted to are obviously going to be on the board. So look for that. Biden would also extend the unemployment benefits all the way out to mid-March. This is another thing that the Democrats advocated for. Now, what was new here and wasn't advocated is President Biden is calling for doubling of the minimum wage, so $7.25 to $15 an hour, and this proposal will alienate Republicans. And in addition, it seeks to end those individuals in the service sector that are receive their compensation through tips, where they have a tipped minimum wage of $2.13 an hour. I know that's low, but that was mainly just to help deal with paying with the taxes, because most of their income, or all of their income really, was coming from tips. This likely will once again eliminate any Republicans from signing on the bill, and that's important because they don't want to use the reconciliation process. So this is a $1.9 trillion economic package that was largely in line with what was previewed by the press, but if you looked at the sell-side economists, really the banks, they were expecting $750 billion to $1 trillion range. And we think a lot of that has to do with really President Biden has taken a moonshot, probably for negotiating reasons, because not only are the Republicans going to balk at this, there's probably it's probably overly aggressive for some of those centrist Democrats. And let's view this. So we're actually using a lot of Goldman Sachs analysis. We thought they did a great job. They have great material. And this shows us just the political spectrum that many people in the Senate are falling on. And we can see that there are, in that center, there are Republicans that are closer to Democrats in the center than they are Republicans on the extreme. And you could say the same thing about the Democrats. So they have more in common with that centrist Republican than they do the extreme Democrats. And President Biden has said that he does not want to use the reconciliation to pass the bill. So what that means is 60 votes are actually needed to get this through. Even if the bill was to use reconciliation, with this 50-50 split in the Senate and very narrow margins of the House, Democrats would need basically every Democrat to vote unanimously for this, and that's probably a pretty tall order. Once again, we could see this in the chart provided here. So this is likely to constrain what Democrats might accomplish even via that reconciliation. Second, the reconciliation process has never been used to pass discretionary spending. So it appears that half of this proposal, that state and fiscal aid, education grants, public health spending, will fall in this category where the centrist Democrats probably are going to push back and not pass the bill in its entirety. There's certainly going to be some, and if we continue to look at Goldman Sachs' work here, we think it is great on what will realistically happen. You're probably looking at somewhere between $750 billion of funding immediately to eventually get to $1.1 trillion. Now, I think we're all kind of hearing the billion and trillion thrown around so much that it kind of desensitizes just to how big that really is. And at 1.1, that's still 5% of the GDP. So this is still a mammoth bill. And it's likely to be the first of two major proposals, with that second proposal dealing with taxes, infrastructure, and benefit programs sometime around mid-year. In other words, really more trillions are coming. So this is probably that first attempt, and President Biden is putting the number out to be so big, knowing that he can use some negotiating tactics to give some of that so that he can get a more a closer to that $1 trillion package versus something that would probably be smaller if he started with a $1 trillion package. So we're getting a lot of with both the House and the Senate now controlled by the Democrats, as well as President Biden. The government is Democratic. What's it going to look like under Democratic rule? And we don't subscribe to the dire straits that many people have put out there, that it's really not going to be that fundamentally different. Maybe we're wrong, but we think upper income tax rates will likely increase to finance some of these tax reductions. But if you look at it, who are going to bear the brunt of that? It's that 0.1 or even the top 1%. 95 to 99 percentile in income is going to see a marginal increase in their taxes. So we don't think that there is this major cliff that we're going to see on tax changes coming out of this. And this is a Deutsche Bank image that we're using here. But whether Congress is likely to reverse some of this individual income tax changes or not, what a lot of people don't understand is in 2017, whenever President Trump was able to get his tax cuts pushed through, they used the reconciliation process. So they had to put a lot of timetables on there that these things would sunset and expire, since they also weren't able to get 60 votes. And many of those things are beginning to expire. So the Democrats don't necessarily have to increase taxes. They can just let those expire. And by 2025, all of those changes would go away. And we would just revert back to that 39.6%. And so we do think that the Democrats will have some changes to tax code, but they don't need it to have the increases in taxes. But there's likely to be some. What we do think is more likely is those deductions for state and local income and property taxes, which really were hit the states that lean left, that already have a higher income tax and other taxes that were benefiting from the deductions. Remember that tax cut in 2017 was supposed to be revenue neutral. It was really just a tax shift. We expect to see some of that come back off, and can see Democrat senators that may be centrist going along with having some type of slight increase in the taxes with a reduction or bringing back those itemized deductions in some manner. There probably will once again be some type of tax increase there. Now, there's also questions about Social Security taxes and the Biden's proposal to apply 12.4% Social Security payroll tax on incomes over $400,000, which would likely be the biggest tax increase seen in his policy. That's unlikely to go through because it cannot be done via reconciliation. That would need those 60 votes. So the item that is probably the largest tax increase is unlikely to get pushed through. So what about capital gains taxes? Capital gains taxes are unlikely to rise as much as President Biden has proposed. During the president election campaign, he proposed the tax long-term capital gains and qualified dividends at a rate of ordinary income tax. So that's 39.6 for any individuals whose income is over $1 million. This looks unlikely, as at least a few of those Democratic members of the House and Senate are likely to object to such a proposal. So it's hard to rule out any tax increase on capital gains and dividends. However, if Congress does raise the rates on capital gains and dividends, Goldman Sachs, and we think they're right, it's probably around 28%. And really, this is the same rate President Reagan and the divided Congress agreed to in 1986. So we think that's a good thing to kind of point to as precedent and where that would go. Now, we are looking at our strategies, especially our tax sensitive strategies, on what changes we would make and realizing gains probably a little bit more aggressively in 2021 because there is still a likely increase, probably a little bit further out than this year though. What about corporate tax increases? And continuing with Goldman's analysis, they expect that tax increase to be no more than 25%. And this really gets in line with that corporate tax rate of 21 to 28% that President Biden campaigned on. So there's really not going to be sufficient support for congressional Democrats to implement these proposals. There will be enough support among centrist Democrats to raise the corporate tax rate probably around that 25%. So just like this, the $2 trillion is kind of a moonshot to begin the negotiations, it'll probably be pulled back. Now, one thing to note is each percentage point increase in the corporate tax rate would generate $100 billion in additional revenue, according to models. We all know that an increase in taxes would change behavior, so it's probably not that the corporate the companies would just sit there and do nothing and continue on, though it likely would increase it. So this would increase really about $400 billion over the next 10 years. Now, I want to remind everyone that we're talking about a $2 trillion stimulus bill, probably $1 trillion. We're talking about maybe a $3 trillion infrastructure spending. And if we were to increase the tax rates just to where they currently are on corporations to 25%, it would only raise $400 billion over the next 10 years. So that just shows you how much more spending is happening versus additional revenue. Whatever the case is, once again, those tax breaks or tax cuts in 2017 were done through the reconciliation process. There's a lot of expensing of research and development that are coming through and also will be phased out. So whatever happens, whether it's just the phase out and the Trump tax cuts just roll off, or the Democrats make a change, we're likely to see taxes increase for businesses. What about that infrastructure plan? One, it's probably going to focus on taxes, infrastructure, renewable energy. The believed price tag is at $3 trillion, and we're not going to get deep into this because we haven't even seen it proposed. It'll probably come later this summer whenever that bill proposes, and we'll go into great detail about that. What we do expect to see is favoring those renewable energy, favoring infrastructure. Most likely Republicans can get on board with infrastructure spending, so we think that this is the likely scenario for that infrastructure bill to be proposed, and it has to be some type of consensus to one, appease the moderate Democrats as well as get some of the Republicans to go on board. The margins are just too small for the Democrat majority. They in the Senate, the only way they have a majority is if it's a tiebreaker, and Vice President Harris will cast the tiebreaker. So we can look at Goldman Sachs policy calendar, and we'll keep this just to review it over time. So let's move on to money supply. So the money supply, that's that green, it's not really easily visible here on the chart, and we can see that it's above the money supply growth all the way back to 2012. Still small relative to the money supply growth that we saw last year, but this is very robust. A lot of it is the $600 stimulus checks that are starting to hit people's banks account, and we still have the $1 trillion to $2 trillion package that's being presented for the next stimulus package. Also, Fed leadership has been pushing back against any premature tapering, which could then constrain the money supply growth, with statements saying that they want to see 2% inflation for a year before raising rates. Why is that important? Because usually once it hits an annualized 2%, the central bank would begin to slow the money supply growth, because you do need to get ahead of inflation. Well, if you let it continue on for a full year, you do risk runaway inflation. Inflation's been so low for so long that the policy wonks would probably want to see some inflation above that target for quite some time. And also, Fed Chair Powell said the economy is far from the Fed's employment and inflation goals. So now is not the time to be talking about exiting the market with its aggressive monetary policy. So let's move on to our themes. Inflation risk is high. It is certainly something that we've talked about, and we're going to go in a little bit here today. But we also wanted to talk about earnings season, because earnings season is wrapping up this week. Even though it's a short week, we're going to see 43 companies in the S&P 500 to report. Now, in terms of actual quantitative expectations, continuing to use some of that great work that was done by Goldman, the consensus expects the S&P 500 to report fourth quarter year-over-year earnings percentage growth of negative 11%, as virus restrictions still are hampering the growth of cyclical sectors. So that's excluding energy. If we exclude energy, the S&P earnings is expected to fall by more than a modest 8%, but that's still negative. So that gives you an idea of what is expected and how much of an impact the restrictions have had on the economy. Consumer prices, so that inflation theme. We've seen consumer prices rise for 7 straight months, and that we haven't seen that in quite some time. And if we look at just where that's happening, because remember the consumer price has all items in that basket, there's still a drag on the services because restaurants and other things are still not moving up. But we're beginning to see that roll off as well. One, commodities are leading the charge, especially in food bill. I think we're all seeing the increases there. But gasoline, which has really detracted from the index for quite some time, is beginning to move up as well. So a lot of the things that have been holding the CPI back have now stabilized, based, and beginning to move up. And the things that have let us out don't look like they're slowing down at the moment. Now let's look at price points for the market. Continues to trend up. We can see that long-term trend. I think that's a slope of about 10% annualized. Certainly the market is moving up. Now we expect to see long-term rates somewhere around 6% for equity returns after adjusting for inflation. So that with 10% you're going to have pullbacks to kind of dampen that slope, as well as inflation pulling some of that off. But we're certainly within line with how the market has been continues to react. A lot of people are worried about market valuations. We think with the amount of stimulus that is being produced, both fiscal and monetary, that the market is acting in a rational way, and it's not significantly overvalued. Everything is certainly priced to rich premiums, but whenever you consider what are your other options, we think equity markets are attractive, and that's why they continue to move up. And if we look at the dollar index, last couple of weeks we have seen a stabilized price in the dollar, though we're near lows, and we do ultimately expect the dollar to push further below, and we'll move into a cycle where the dollar has been declining relative to other currencies. For so long it's been so strong. Relative strength, despite severe headwinds for small companies, whether that is just their optimism going forward, whether that's a lot of that is sector-based businesses, then you throw in increased taxes, possible increase of the minimum wage, which would certainly hurt the smaller companies. They have a lot of headwinds, but nonetheless, these companies are outperforming the other sectors. It's been an area that continues to outpace. If we just look at on this time frame, the S&P 500 is the leading index at up 6.33% for the year. Obviously, things continue to change. We have made changes, and we're continuing to dampen our exposure to large capitalized technology companies. We still maintain it overweight. We'll continue to maintain it overweight, but they've been so dominant in the portfolio for so long, they just continue to be a larger percentage than what we want to own relative to a diversified income or diversified portfolio. So we continue to trim. We've been putting in a small cap as well as emerging markets, an area that has done quite well through the recession. We also swapped gold for a broad commodity basket of commodity futures. Gold has not been working as well as we would expect given the amount of increase in the money supply. We don't know if it's that Bitcoin is really taking some of that flow. Nonetheless, our technical said you got to sell it, but commodities as a broad basket, we're doing well, and we've exchanged that gold fund for commodities, and we'll continue to monitor. We do expect gold long term to move up. Whenever you look at the technical charts, it does have some resistance here, so it's not grossly acting out of the way that it's supposed to be. There's precedent here, but we still would expect it to be moving at a little better pace. And if we then continue on, if we look at bonds, the yield curve continues to climb. There was actually a spike in yield whenever President Biden had announced the stimulus package because the numbers were much higher than what was expected by the banks. So what's causing that? Yes, government borrowing, government spending. It has kind of pulled back since that statement. The banks can lend more if that spread is higher, so this increases the likeliness of the money supply continuing to move up, as well as just inflation expectations. And once again, we are seeing that in the commodities area of the index. So the final thing is just looking at where the 10-year is. It did drop from last week down to 1.11, not too surprising. This is just for the end of last week, so wouldn't be surprised to see that continue its move up. Really, historically, these are very low rates, and you would expect if the recovery is gaining some momentum, despite some of the headwinds that it's facing, you would expect those yields to move up. So, John, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, sir.
It looks like we're out of time. Thanks again for your insights into the market, Aaron. We look forward to having you back in the studio next week. We expect to see a number of changes over the first 100 days of the Biden administration, including his planned executive orders today. We don't see anything extraordinary that will impact the market negatively. We are, of course, always prepared to address black swans that could impact the market. The administration change, as Aaron said, will not be the black swan that will cause the market to drop. More than the unknown risks are the unknowable. For now, we believe the economy and the market will continue to move forward through 2021. As always, our goal is to sift through the noise so you can be better informed when making decisions around your money. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the GWS YouTube channel. Just click the button on the bottom right of your screen and you'll be alerted to our future broadcasts. Finally, we'd love to hear from you, whether it's to share feedback, ask a question about your portfolio, or learn more about engaging our firm. Please call the number on your screen and someone from our team will be in touch shortly for a confidential, complimentary consultation. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you with us for next week's Market Insight broadcast.